Well, hello there.
Hello again.
Hello, Balra.
Welcome.
Hello.
It's like, oh no, did we lose her?
No.
How are you doing today?
I am fabulous. How are you?
We woke up early to go to the DMV and then couldn't do what we needed to do at the DMV, so that wasn't great, but otherwise I'm good.
We got a list of things that we can do to do the thing that we need to do at the DMV. It's very exciting.
So Ben, I'm going to get some background music in. Do you want to sort of explain what we're doing here today?
Sure. Yeah, so today we are hanging out with Balra, obviously. And we're going to be discussing a number of things. Obviously, a heavy emphasis on the TTRPG space, writing in said space, neurodivergence at the gaming table. I'm sure those of you that are currently here watching are aware that there is just a small amount of neurodivergence extant on this channel. So we're going to talk about that in general. And we're going to talk about the importance of improvisation, so yes and at the table as opposed to no or but, unless there are buts, in which case carry on as you were. So to have this conversation, we thought that one person that we would love to talk about it with is Balra, who writes TTRPGs, plays TTRPGs, is a queen in her own right of D&D.
Gosh. No, you didn't.
I did it.
Yeah, the actual queen of D&D.
She is the canonical queen of D&D.
It's official.
You heard it here first, guys.
The coronation happened at 8:09 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 15th of the year of our Lord and Savior Gibbers Crabs 2022. Yeah, it's an old reference to the oatmeal, I think.
I don't get that.
It's Gibbers Crabs is one of those shrimp that has the sonic boom things. It's a long story. It's a comic. It's fine. It's a web comic. It's fine. Moving on.
Balra is also a VTuber, which is why
Yes.
you're seeing this gorgeous avatar in the bottom left corner of our screens.
Yeah.
Balra, do you want to just sort of introduce yourself a little bit more? Let us know what you've been up to, maybe if you have any potentially TTRPG writing that people can check out before we sort of dig into the conversation.
Full disclosure, I'm terrible at introducing myself.
That's totally fine. So am I.
So, now that we have that out of the way. Yeah, and obviously, I think we already covered all of that, the VTubing, YouTubing, streaming, which I do generally 3 days a week. I think in this month I've been doing 2 days a week, sort of gearing up for the end of the year. I think next week I'll probably only do 1 day, just because I don't expect people to show up when we're right on the holidays.
Yeah, that is very fair.
Spend time with your family, spend time with your loved ones.
Counterpoint, those poor people who have to go home to see families that they don't get along with could probably use some distraction.
Yeah, no, that's facts.
But,
Fair
that's also
point.
what VODs are for, so that you can enjoy your holiday season should you
That's
feel so
also
inclined.
true.
Yeah.
Very true, very true.
Yeah.
But in terms of writing TTRPGs, I published a number of things a few years ago before I took everything down and sort of vanished for a couple of years. But since I came back, one of the first things that I put out was Shwegwe. The next one I put out was Domain of An-Nasr. And then over the Halloween season, I put out a trick-or-treat encounter, which, full disclosure, very deadly encounter. So if you don't like deadly encounters, don't use it. Don't use it.
And just out of curiosity, where could people find that if they wanted to get a copy?
Presently, DM's Guild.
Cool.
if you follow my links, I should have a card that actually links to literally everything. I try to make sure that all of that links back to each other well enough. But the next thing I'm hoping to get out soonish is to re-release the Manual of Merging Rivers. It was a Shinobi subclass. It was a Way of the Shadow rework, but then I also added in an additional Bard subclass, and I think I may have an additional Rogue subclass to fit into that theme that's all in that package. So
That's very cool.
Wow, that's super cool.
I need to re-release that because I actually put a lot of work into it and did a lot of like historical referencing from the collection of Shinobi manuals. So there's lots of history in it.
That is very cool. I guess a quick follow-up question to that. When you write TTRPGs, how much do you create and how much do you sort of pull in from, history or from mythology or from already extant sort of source material?
That's a fabulous question.
Oh,
I guess it really depends on what it is. Looking over, because, let's be honest, when we look at storytelling as a whole, a lot of it is very much drawn from the human experience and history.
Yes.
Typically speaking. So I would probably say that there's going to be at least a historical reference in most of the things that I write. Whether clear or not quite as clear, but certainly it plays a huge, huge role because I am a very, very big advocate on doing a lot of research.
I love that.
I'm notorious on like having multiple tabs open, multiple books open, and several bookmarks in various places, and just cross-referencing everything.
I feel that so deeply in my soul.
I relate to that. Yep.
Yeah. I was gonna say you're definitely in good company on that front.
I feel like that's why we get on so well. Because we're just same wavelength on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, definitely a lot of it, a whole lot of historical references. Because I also like to keep in mind is like what in current pop media or what in mythology is derived from history as well, in how it comes to that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. That so much of mythology is really historical.
Yeah, and in understanding like how that evolves, and then what I can learn from that, and borrow from that for whatever else. And then there's a small percentage that is literally based off of stupid jokes.
I mean, if you don't have some stupid jokes in your writing, is it really good writing?
You need stupid jokes. That is a mandatory thing. Otherwise, you're just going to be seen as like pretentious and taking yourself too seriously.
That's also
definitely
true.
I think one of the most recent ones that I confirmed that I'm going to have to put in somewhere in one of my TTRPG things is I was trying to talk to someone because it's a common thing when people hear about you being in Australia. They ask you about Foster's Beer and Outback Steakhouse. And as I was trying to just...
Wait, Outback? Why?
Who knows?
Confused about.
Yeah, who knows? But anyway... so as I was trying to respond and say something about Outback Steakhouse, it came out as Outback Steakback.
Wow.
I was like, I butchered that so well. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have to put that in somewhere because it's ridiculous.
Outback Steakback. I like it. Is it a location, a magic item? What's it gonna be?
A meal?
Probably a very ridiculous location.
I like it. I like
it.
Yeah. That's very cool.
I don't know where I'm going to put it, but it's going to have to surface somewhere. if,
like
if for no other reason, to make fun of myself for mixing words up.
Totally understand that. I have another question, and also just the way this always goes is I end up having a million questions. So Ben and Zeki or Balra, please stop me if you have other things that you want to talk about, because I will just keep shooting them off until the end of the stream. But I was going to ask, how did you get into TTRPGs?
That was the question I wanted to ask.
Great, there we go.
Yeah.
Or the first one, at any rate.
Yeah.
I got into them as a kid. I was introduced by older family members. That got into the first edition of D&D and had the classic Red Book.
That's awesome. How old were you?
Oh my goodness. I remember flipping through D&D books when I was 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
That's
awesome.
So it's very much been a lifelong thing for me, and D&D has come a very, very long way.
That is true.
There's so much it has changed. And there was definitely like a lot of things back then that, you know, looking back on it, it's like, yeah, some of this stuff really needed to change. But, you know, and then there's some things that kind of remain a bit nostalgic, because it used to be very, very classic fantasy, and I feel like it's moved past classic fantasy, if that makes sense.
I'd agree. Yeah.
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 Sort of trying to like carve out its own niche.
Yeah. But
And-
I think I tend to be a bit nostalgic about classic fantasy to some degree as well. And I don't know if maybe it's because I kind of grew up with that, or I don't know.
I mean, I think that there's definitely a level of familiarity that just feels really good and safe,
Yeah.
especially in a fantasy or a creative world.
Yeah,
I know that,
definitely.
you know, like to a different sort of extent, like the worlds, the books that you read as a kid, like those are always going to feel like they are kind of like home bases, at least for me.
Yeah,
Going
definitely.
back, even if reading them as an adult, you're like, this isn't as good as I remember it. It still has that pull and that nostalgia,
Yeah.
and like you
Yeah.
have almost like your memory of that world, which is kind of different than the reality of what that world necessarily is, because there's so much that was impactful in
Yeah.
your life around it. So I totally
that's-
totally understand.
yeah, that's sort of the thing too, because it's like, you know, in a time where, because when we think of like classic fantasy, we think of like Tolkien and things like that, and so like classic D&D was sort of like the closest you could get to playing Lord of the Rings without actually, you know, playing Lord
Yeah.
of the Rings.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that's sort of, it brings that nostalgia with it. But it's been fascinating to just see how far it's come and see where it's at now.
And I mean, also just the boom of TTRPGs that are not 5e or not 5e, D&D, Jesus. Like all
Yeah.
of these other systems that exist now that maybe don't cater to that same sort of fantasy world, or do in a very
Absolutely.
different way. I don't know if you play a lot of things besides D&D, or if you have any like thoughts on sort of other systems that you enjoy, or if you're very much like, you know, this is my home base, I like it here, don't need to change it.
Stealing my
I did play Star Wars tabletop, and I had a lot of fun with that.
That's great.
In
Which
I
one,
first-
by the way?
Yeah.
Oh boy, you know what? I don't remember. It was years and years ago. It was whichever version it was that you could actually play a kid.
Okay.
Oh.
I don't know if that helps, but I remember frustrating a lot of Jedis and bounty hunters because I decided to play a kid.
Love that.
Interesting. Was it because they didn't want to kill a kid, potentially?
Not exactly. It was more because I had a bottle of Fizzy Glug, and in some roundabout way, I figured out how to use that bottle of Fizzy Glug to short circuit the command center that shut down an entire droid armor.
Oh my god.
That's
So, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Hell yeah.
And of course, when you're in a party full of like Jedi and bounty hunters, you took away the things that they were fighting and looking cool fighting, right? Nobody wants that.
Right.
That's a good, honestly, it's a good point. But also, as one of those players, you have to be like, okay, you did a bang up job. Do I no longer look cool shooting these droids that are turned off? No, I do not. But also, our chances of survival are now exponentially better.
Yeah.
No way. Cool, alive.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's very cool.
I played Edge of the Empire like a little bit like a few years ago, and that was super fun, but I don't think that's the one where you can play kids. So that just might be the Star Wars the role-playing game, maybe?
Yeah, that might be like the
I think
OG
so.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was.
From back in '87 is when it was published.
Yeah.
First
Yeah,
released at any
yeah.
rate.
Because it was really, really old.
I was gonna say, so it came out like roughly same time as second edition.
Yeah,
Somewhere in there.
yeah.
Cool. Actually, speaking of editions, do you have this? I know that this can be a very controversial question to ask, but do you have a favorite edition of Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh. Okay. So I think yes and no.
Uh-oh.
Yes and no.
It's a very diplomatic answer.
There's certain editions that I appreciate for very, very specific reasons.
Cool.
So 5th edition was great for how it took the system and it really simplified it. And I think that's fabulous.
Mhm.
Because prior to that, there was a lot of modifiers. There was a whole lot of math, and it just got absolutely frustrating. And it was very, very intimidating, especially for newer players. So it was very, very hard to bring new people in, because it's like, well, if you play a drow, then you have to use double the XP to level your drow. But by the way, you get this negative modifier because XYZ, and so on and so forth. Whereas 5th edition, it's very, very different. It's still a lot to take in, but you can take that and condense it and kind of spoon feed it. And so it's easier to bring new people in. And I actually have a brand new person at my table who is like really overwhelmed. She didn't think that she was going to be able to get on with D&D because like everyone that she knew would sit down for hours and hours to play, and she's like, I just don't have that time to put in it. I'm like, you don't have to put that time in it. If you only have 2 hours every week, every other week to put in, you can absolutely do that. So here, let me make it as simple as possible. And so we did the full-on walkthrough, and that's one thing I have to give D&D Beyond credit for, is that they do have the character creation walkthrough. I do think there's a bit of work for them to help filter out choices so that it's not as overwhelming for new players. And that's something that I hope to see them develop in the future.
Yeah.
Because right now, when you put a new player in there, they're like, well, what's this choice and this choice, and what do I check off? And
It's
so,
still-
yeah, it's still quite a bit. But, at least you can kind of work with it to bring new players in now, which is good. But in terms of overall, I still have an appreciation, I think, for like 1st edition D&D. Why? Because of simplicity. Because there is such a thing as an oversaturation of choices to the point that, people can take a step back and say, you know what, never mind, this is too much. And so that has been a criticism that I've had for D&D for a very long time, is that the longer an edition has been in play, the more and more the choices inflate, both for players and DMs. And then it gets to the point that you have like 8-10 books, and then it's like, I need all of this to play a game.
Yeah.
Do you feel that it's specifically the barrier to entry for new players that makes you like the simplicity better? Or is that also something that you, as a very experienced player, still feel oversaturated with choice in like say 5e?
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both.
Because usually, because first they come out with the core books, and then they come out with a couple extra, and the couple extra is usually great. You know, it's like, okay, once you've been in for a bit, you got a couple of extra in case you're a bit bored with like the base. But then it goes beyond that, and they just keep piling on, and then not only do the players need to know their class, you know, you have the DMs that need to memorize all the new books and the new subclasses and the this and the that, and if they don't, then you know they have players that come in with something brand new that they haven't looked at yet, and it's like, oh, where did this come from? So it becomes very inundating, which I get it from a business perspective. You know, they kind of need to do that to keep the money coming in, but you know, at the same time, it's, I don't know.
I get that. It's a little bit of choice paralysis and decision paralysis, even for people who have been playing the game for a long time. I mean, I know even when I'm creating a character, especially if we have, you know, like when we're doing it on D&D Beyond, if we have imported all of the other books, it's just like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
So
and that therein is my criticism, because like we know from psychological research that choice paralysis is a real thing.
Yes.
Yep.
Massively so.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, but I also, the flip side, can understand that if you've been playing something for a long time, and not that you can, I mean, I don't want to say bored, because I don't think you can ever really get bored of an improv game that constantly is shifting. But if you are sort of feeling like I want to do something mechanically that's a little bit different, and you've played all of those core classes, I also can see that side of things of wanting to be like, all right, well, let's get some more content. Let's get something else that I could be doing, or something else that I could be playing. Which I was going to say, which I mean, I'm sure that you understand as well, Balra, considering you literally write TTRPG things for D&D. So you get that piece as well.
Yeah, certainly. And you know, sometimes I kind of hope that there would be more focus on putting out adventures as opposed to just more options.
Yeah.
Because that's a huge thing.
Is that like another reason that first edition sticks out so much to you as like a front runner in your favorites? Because I don't know, from my perspective, like looking back on it as never playing first edition, it seems to me that there was always a ton of adventure modules compared to like source books or subclasses and stuff like that.
You know, I hadn't thought about it, but I think you have a really good point. Maybe that was the case in subconsciously, and I hadn't quite put my finger on it. But yeah, no, that's true. There was a lot of adventure modules, and so it always felt like there was a new story to get into.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that there's a lot of, with the evolution of the game, a lot of homebrewing, and sort of like this expectation that people need the pieces and that they're going to then kind of make the puzzle themselves, as opposed to giving people the puzzle and then sort of being like, all right, put the pieces in order.
But even though it's always been a thing that like homebrewers would take an adventure and then move pieces around in it. And in essence, really, it saved DMs from having to do a lot of work. Having to like write an entire thing. Yeah,
I mean, that makes sense to me. Yeah, that's true. Sometimes we just don't have the time to put the pieces together.
Well, if you're just getting started and it's, you know, trying to, you know, manage a group for the first time, and like the dynamic and how you encourage people to role play and whatnot. It's like, okay, I can do all those things, but I can't also write a story that is coherent and has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and has towns and characters. Like that's a lot.
Especially if it's not your full-time thing, which let's be real, it's not for 99.9% of people who play Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. You have your family, and you have your social life, and you have the thing that makes you money, and kids or whatever else. And it's hard. It's a lot to expect one person to sort of take on that creation of a world.
And so that was sort of where adventure modules kind of filled that gap. And so it's like, even if you didn't follow it 100% faithfully, you had the map, you had the dungeons, and you had a handful of NPCs already, that linked all of the goals together. And so you could change things out as you needed, but the bulk of the work was done.
Yeah.
And even if you weren't 100% happy with that adventure module, guaranteed it gave you ideas on what you would like to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know that's just like speaking to my experience DMing recently. Essentially, I've taken a module and completely reworked it, but it's been nice to have those pieces to then take out and rip apart and completely change, but to at least have that as like a jumping off point, especially as someone who really doesn't have the time to sit down for like several hours and build out that world from scratch. I totally hear what you're saying. Also, Ben, it looked like you were opening your mouth to speak.
I did. I actually, so I was going to sort of use this as like a segue into my question, which was like, how did you get started writing in the TTRPG space? And what was the first thing you wrote? If you remember the first
or
thing.
if you're comfortable talking about it.
True. Also true, if you don't want to, obviously.
It's amazing thinking about it, actually, because I don't think I'd how did I get started writing? It was really a number of years ago, like right before I started working for Satine, because I'd first started getting back into DMing first.
Okay.
Because I was introducing someone into D&D, and he tried out a couple of tables, and I don't know, it wasn't going too well. And I was like, you know what? Let me give it a go. I'll take up DMing again, and it went extraordinarily well. But of course, he came from a Singaporean, Chinese background. And so there wasn't really too much that spoke personally to him. Right. And so that he had sort of this idea of what he wanted to play. And that was when we sat down and we reworked Way of the Shadow.
Interesting.
And so ultimately, what the first thing that I wrote was the Manual of Merging Rivers, which is what I was talking about re-releasing just earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So he's ultimately, to credit, is to why we put that together, because it was for him, because there really wasn't a lot of content that spoke personally to him. And then he's also, well, I think he's actually in chat, Nikhail.
Hi, Nikhail.
Yeah. Wow. He's also a big reason why I took the classic Chinese tale, The Painted Skin, and then turned it into an adventure.
Oh, that is
cool.
Very cool.
I have not released that. I've been thinking about how I want to go about releasing that, because I initially had this idea to because The Painted Skin comes from a series of stories from Strange Tales in a Chinese studio by Bu Songling. And I had thought about doing a multi-volume series on that.
Wow.
But I'm not exactly sure how I want to go about that. And I don't think that I want to release that on the DM's Guild. So, and a lot of that has everything to do with, the fact that it's not placed in the Forgotten Realms. And so it's, the DM's Guild has very, very specific legalese about, content creation.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's something that's kind of like on the shelf for now until I figure out what to do with it. And I have multiple other things I'm working on at the moment anyway, so I don't really have time to get to it.
Totally. Though that makes sense.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say, I don't want to get too into this because I know we have a podcast recording with you coming up in January or February. Yeah. We're going to talk about this a bit more, but I'm curious, do you find yourself mostly writing about sort of, or in the vein of Eastern traditions, or have you written things that kind of span across East and West?
It's been mostly Eastern.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's super cool. I was just curious if it was
Yeah.
like, you're like, this is my passion, this is what we're doing, or if you did a little bit of both.
Because, I mean, ultimately, that's the Eastern traditions. That's my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it makes sense.
It does
it's
make
like
sense.
The Middle East and the traditions in culture there. That's basically that's me. So that's kind of it makes sense for me to write on that.
Oh,
And
that makes sense.
like Far East and obviously, I have like East Asian family and a lot of my friends are as well. And so it's something very, very comfortable, very familiar for me, and something I have a lot of fun sitting down with them in working with them on as well. So you'll probably see like their names pop up here and there in the credits as I work on some of this stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah. And just so everyone knows, we are starting a podcast next year. It's called How the Fuck. We're going to be interviewing different people to ask them about things that they're good at. And we want to have Balra on to talk about how to write TTRPGs that are inclusive of other cultures, to talk about her experience writing TTRPGs and infusing her own religion into them, which is why I don't want to dig too much into that today, because I don't want to what's the word I'm looking for? Dilute what we're going to be recording next year.
Yeah, no worries.
But it's super cool, and it's something that I definitely do want to have we will be having a longer conversation about very shortly.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's so much to be said on it too.
Yes, I know. I'm like, I don't want to open the can of worms, but I do, because I want to hear what you have to say.
But I do, but I don't, but I do.
I just figured like a little bit of edging for all of us. We're gonna be like, okay, great. Just looking forward to that conversation that much more. Do we want to maybe like sort of box up to some extent the like direct discussion of TTRPGs and writing them, and talk a little bit more about like improv and neurodivergence?
Yeah.
So in like the second half we sort of Katie already threw this in Discord, but like we could always do a part 2 of this if we kind of get to a point where it's like, okay, we've talked about neurodivergence at the table and we have not touched any of the improv stuff. So
There's
latter
always room
half
to
being
talk
sort of
more.
a loose
Yeah,
term.
I feel like Katie and I led into a very fun conversation on neurodivergence, because I brought it up to her. I was like, what do you think about touching on this? Because it's been something that's on my mind lately. And because dealing with a couple different tables, like I had some with neurodivergent folks and then one that didn't have any. And like the energy was so different. It was so different. And so I was joking with Katie. I was like, I feel like working with neurodivergent folks, you don't just bring the party to the table, you are the party. Because the energy level is just so different. Like for me, and it's amazing because like a lot of the non-neurodivergent folks, like my German friend, for example, he's really, really great at helping me remember certain mechanics and whatnot. But then on the other hand, it's like with my neurodivergent folks in myself, it like one of my players, he really brings this enthusiasm to the table that it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like a childlike enthusiasm. It's very pure. It's very genuine, and I love it so much.
Which brand of neurodivergent are we talking?
This fellow in particular, I know he stated he's ADD. And so it's wonderful having that energy at the table as well.
It's so fun. I feel like different types of neurodivergency also bring very different things to the table.
Yeah, definitely.
And having both ADHD and autism, I don't know what the fuck I bring, but I definitely feel it for me. My brain just tends to jump through things really quickly.
Yeah.
And that when I'm playing with a bunch of people who are neurotypical, it's just a very different experience, because I feel like there is more of a sort of like slow, meticulous, going through things
Yeah.
step by step. Whereas like they're on point B very thoroughly, and I've skipped down to like point E and kind of like
Right?
breathe through
Yeah.
A, B, C, and D.
Yeah, it's so strange too, because like I feel like I'm on a very similar like pacing track with you, because I had an opportunity to play with you at least once,
Yes.
and like you and I were very much like, okay, let's go.
We're like,
And-
like
Yeah. But at the same time, like for me, I have that attention to detail with autism. Like, okay, well, we're moving along, but this detail and this detail.
yes.
And then
also-
you stopped and you were like, right. And I don't know, I felt well, like we worked off of each other pretty well.
I think so too, and I also feel like there's this weird thing of like moving very quickly, but also wanting to make sure that there aren't any big things that are sort of skipped over, and somehow
Yes.
being able to move quickly, but be aware of the major things that might have, you know, like plot holes or things we may have
Yes.
missed as a party or that sort of thing.
Definitely.
It's a very like I wish that I had studied neuroscience. I almost did, because like it's just such an interesting way that brains work. And neither one nor the other is necessarily bad, but it's just that when you're at a table
Yeah.
with all neurodivergent people, suddenly you're just all bouncing off of each other, and like the game is really flowing in a way that, not that it can't be a great session with people who aren't neurodivergent, but it's just a very different feeling sitting around
Very
the
different.
table.
Hmm.
Yeah.
With that in mind,
Definitely.
actually, do you DM when you sort of like prep for the session, or like even during the session, how do you maybe change the way that you go about DMing from a neurodivergent to a non-divergent, a normie table? Sorry, folks. Love you, normies.
To be honest,
Hmm.
I don't really know if I've quite nailed DMing for non-neurodivergent folks. I'm still working on it. You know, I try in, I don't know. I don't know if I've quite gotten that yet.
I don't know that I have either, so I was kind of curious. I was like, oh, maybe I'll just figure it out.
I was gonna say, Ben, I jive so well with your DMing, but that's probably because
Yeah.
I'm not-
What I usually find is that, like, for folks who are not neurodivergent, it's kind of it's a very different and challenging experience
Hmm.
because I'm very thorough with NPCs. The NPCs very much have their own personality, and if it works almost in real time. So it's like you have X amount of time to make this decision, or, you know, this person has wasted enough of their time and they're going to move on. And so
Yeah.
then you get to decide, what do you want to do next? Your adventure may go in a very different direction. And so, like, for me, it's about having each directive loop back around into the main point, so that no matter what avenue they take, they still arrive at the same destination, which has been like the biggest saving grace of any game that I run.
People always go off the rails. You can never get your PCs
Yeah.
to just go where they're supposed to go.
Here's
Like
14
herding
different sets of
cats.
rails. Yes, here's 14 different rails, and they're like, no, none of those.
They were like, I want the secret
Yeah.
15th rail, please.
I think, and I had a British player that one time I absolutely could not account for this, because he did like this Jekyll and Hyde archetype character, and then he decided at some point that he would streak out of the inn and then go find a nice set of clothes somewhere else. And I'm like, what would possess you to do this? But I was like, okay, we're rolling with it, and we're literally going to roll with it. Where's my dice?
How well do you streak? Oh, that's so funny.
Does anyone call the constable?
Pretty much.
Well,
It's interesting, kind of going back to something you said earlier about like you have X amount of time to like figure things out, and then things will move on. Something that has always kind of not like bothered me in an aggressive way, but always kind of like in the back of my mind been frustrating is that when you're taking forever as a group in character to talk about something that you have a finite amount of time in game to do, and it might just be my brain like needing order. But if it's in character that those conversations are happening and you go on for like 5 or 10 minutes and you have like 30 seconds till this bomb goes off, I'm just like, this doesn't make sense anymore.
Yes.
You're talking above the table and strategizing, sure, out of game,
Yes.
whatever. But if you are in game, like take the set amount of time that is given to you in game. And I don't know if that's a neurodivergent thing. That is just a pet peeve of mine. That it bothers me so much.
Yes, I'm literally in the same boat with this because I'm like, okay, well, you're standing here like just staring at this NPC, wondering
just chatting
if
in
you
front
want,
of them.
yeah, and you think he's just gonna stand here and then wait for you until you're done with your conversation. He's got somewhere to be. He's got his own life. See you, I'm out.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. That might just be a me thing that is a me or me and you thing that's like a me and you thing. Or it might be somehow linked to like that sort of like need for things to make sense. And like, you know, in game, that doesn't make sense that you would spend that amount of time and that person would still be there. It's like illogical.
Just like staring blankly with the like voices in the background about the people arguing about the table. And it's just like, all right, well, I guess if you're catatonic, I'm going to go finish running my errands because you interrupted me.
Yeah, you remember when I was making that joke about, could you imagine sitting through a movie and then like it's just 2 hours of the main characters discussing amongst themselves like what decision they're going to arrive at? It wouldn't happen.
It just doesn't make sense. But okay, what I will say is there have been a lot of art house films that have pretty much that exact same plot. So it has been done. They're not good. They've been done.
That's fair.
I feel like the important part of that is they are not good.
No, but I'm just acknowledging that there have been movies that have been done.
They exist.
Two people talking to each other for a really long time and nothing happening. But yeah, I think I'm curious actually, Ben, what is your experience? I know you are also a neurospicy baby. What is your experience with that and how that interacts with your gaming? Just because kind of asked a lot of questions but haven't given a lot of perspective.
Yeah.
And also you are brain injured, so there's another layer there for you.
Yeah, I concussed myself very badly playing rugby my freshman year of college.
Wow.
Yeah, I had to relearn how to type. There is actually, so I got a brain scan this past spring, and there is damage on the right side, like right on the homunculus, which is where your fingers and toes and all of your motor functions, fine motor skills are wired, and there is definitive damage. And then also my left frontal lobe is there's a little bit of damage, which is a lot of mood regulation. So I am pretty not flatline, but I have a very even keel as a result.
You're a robot.
I can be a little bit robotic about some things that are this is a very emotional conversation. And I'm like, well, logically speaking, X, Y, and Z thing must be true. So therefore, here we are. And Katie's like, this is a conversation about feelings. How can you say that? I'm like, it's just, I don't know what to tell you. It's just.
I always just thought that was you, Ben. I just thought that was just Ben, the person.
I mean, I think it always was, and I think it's just
just gotten worse.
It's been turned up a little bit.
Yeah. Ben did lobotomize himself.
Yeah, pretty much. So what I will say is that because D&D doesn't have a whole lot to do with motor function or with my mood regulation, although I have
ADHD.
I do have severe ADHD.
Yeah, that is neurodiversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of DM for myself, I think, in the sense that I like to keep to try to keep things moving just so that I don't get bored, which I imagine sort of lends itself to everyone else being bored.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and my first group was 13 people, which is an insane number of people to DM.
I'd lose my mind.
It was honestly okay, beyond the fact that it was nightmarish to manage that many people with social interactions and whatnot. It was really good for like figuring out sort of like tricks as to like, okay, how do I like keep things moving in combat? Because a round of combat with 13 people is like an hour.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're like, oh god, and people are thinking. Fortunately, casters do not have any excuse when there are 12 other people at the table to be like, oh, I don't know what spell I'm using. You're like, you've had 45 minutes.
Yes,
Right?
yes, thank you.
Like,
You must be ready to fucking go as soon as I call your name.
Yeah. And sometimes it'd be like, okay, you've got 30 seconds to make a decision, or you lose your turn because we need to keep moving. And I have not had to do that. I've not had to get anywhere near that like urgent with people in smaller games. But I feel like it's like there's like a lot of tips and tricks that I learned from that. But at the end of the day, that group was also a mixture of folks who are neurospicy and neurotypical. And so I think with that balance, it was. I sort of DM the way I normally DM. It was just like a lot more people, so it took a little more time than it would normally. But I don't know that I've DM'd at a table of all neurotypical people, and I'm very curious what that would end up feeling like, because the energy levels are very different, the way that people interact with the world and interact with one another, and pattern recognition was a thing that was brought up in chat. There's a lot of differences, and so like how do people approach problem solving? I don't know. I play with neurospicy people, so I have a very different perspective.
So one thing that I noticed, especially DMing, and I totally lost track of my train of thought as I spoke up, because why not?
We're talking about neurodivergence. Is there anything more perfect than being like, yeah, I had it, and it's gone?
Oh man, the amount of times that happens to me.
What was I saying? Oh my.
Neurodivergence, gaming, table, 13 people.
DMing for yourself and
DMing
how
for yourself. Yes, I think I got
being-
it. I think I got it. In one of them, I noticed was I have an acute sense and attention to detail, and so that's something that often comes out in DMing. And like now, I noticed with a lot of with some neurotypical DMs, and I'm sure that there are exceptions to this rule, but like the ones that I dealt with is that when you come up with something really clever that'll give you information, they're like, oh no, now I have to tell my plans. Whereas for me, I get excited because I'm like, oh, now I get to overload you with information. Are you ready? Hold my drink. Here we go.
Buckle up, Buttercup.
Yeah. And so I throw in all of this information, sensory information, what they see, what they hear, what they feel, etc. And I get excited to do that. And so like, I notice there's a difference in those who pick up the detail and those who overlook the details. And so then I often find myself, pointing out the details for them, which has been a very big difference.
Interesting.
At least in terms of like DMing with autism. So there's definitely a lot. I will say there's big pros with that. Having attention to detail and then being excited to do that info dump as opposed to like, oh no, now I have to give away my plans. It's like, I don't have to give away my plans, but here's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to hint at it and see if you can piece it together, because I'm excited to see if you do. And so that's always fun. And then it's interesting to see what folks do with the information that they're given. They get this piece of information, that information, and then they try to logically deduce and then piece it together. And then sometimes they're pretty close, and then other times they are so far off the mark, they have no idea what they're doing anymore.
This is not directly related, but I'm curious. I DM and have ADHD. You're DM and you have autism, and I'm curious what your preparation, like what your preparation for a session looks like.
I usually like to do a general breakdown. And then the first is like an outline of, here are the main points. This is what I need to get them through.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I start from like point 1. And then I try to logically deduce to myself, well, what choices might they make? They might make this choice, and this choice. And usually it ranges from a good choice, a kind of a good choice, a neutral choice, a somewhat bad choice, and then a really, really bad choice.
I do this too. This is exactly what I do when I prep. This is brilliant. Yeah.
And so you kind of have to figure out, well, this spectrum of choices that they may they may pick, and then how do I take that choice and then jog it into the next objective? So it's like objective, spectrum of choices, march it into the next objective, spectrum of choices, march that into the next objective, and then so on. And then what gets really challenging is when I have the rare player, and this is very, 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 very rare. I've only really ever had one player that ever really did this to me, is come up with a choice that was nowhere on the spectrum at all. And then I'm like, okay, right, I guess I'm improving how we get to the next objective. So here we go.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So I often find that it helps to have kind of a general idea and outlay of like the surrounding area. It's like, well, even if they don't choose any of these choices, and let's say they go over to this corner for who knows what reason, because maybe someone decides they want to randomly streak and then find a nice outfit to wear instead, like my British player did.
Gotta do what you gotta do.
Then there's this family over here, and they'll probably react X way.
Ooh, okay.
This is.
So,
oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, so like because obviously you always have to kind of account for like the exception of stepping outside of that spectrum of choices, and that no matter what, if they step outside of that box, then there's going to be something within this limited range of the map. And if they go beyond that map, then it's like, well, what are you doing now? You're not even playing the game anymore. Just stop.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting. I just had a thought, which is like not super related to this, but related to DM prepping. And I was just like, how nice would it be if there was like I don't want to call it a video game, but just essentially like a world that you could navigate through. So if someone's like, hey, I want to go to the next town over, you could literally just like move into a 3D modeled town that has like pre-existing shops and like NPCs and things like that, so that you could just like have a world that is exited, so that if your players go super off the rails, you could just be like, all right, where the fuck did we end up? Like, let's see, you want to go 2 towns over? Okay, let's just pop over 2 towns, and like almost like just like a world to play in with no like real characters or anything like that, but just the space. I feel like that would be super helpful to me. That is not related to this at all, but was just something that came to my mind as we were talking about DM prepping.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I try to do to some degree. Like, obviously, I can't go too overboard with it, but try to map out so far, because it's like, well, within one session, how far can they go, kind of thing. And that's not a challenge. Please don't take it as a challenge if I have any players in chat. Please don't.
I was gonna say that it is always surprising the amount of ground, whether literally or metaphorically, players can cover if given the opportunity.
I also feel like as a DM, I'm like, stay on the rails, like stay in this story that I created for you. And then when I'm a player, I'm like, how can I break it? I want to break everything. So I'm part of the problem, and I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I feel like for me, I'm a huge advocate of finding unconventional solutions.
Yes.
And usually when I ever play it, like the more unconventional solution that it is, the more I'm impressed. And I'm like, we're going to make this work. I don't know how we're going to make it work, but we're going to make it work.
Yes. To be fair, I always want to get to the place that the DM wants us to get to. I just want to take a route that they didn't expect. That is like my goal when I play TTRPGs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Works well for me because my prep is basically non-existent. Like I will even with like longer campaigns that I've run in the past that have been pre-written or whatever, it's like I guess I'll read like a couple of pages into the session that we're gonna do today, and like hopefully we go somewhere in that direction. But if not, it'll be fine. And I like ostensibly improvise 90% of whatever it is that goes on in the average session. Because I know that I have at least one player at the table that is actively trying to find out how she can get out of the box. Sorry, did I hint at who it might be? How she can get out of like the space that
I don't
created.
make silly like I'm not like, oh, you want us to go this direction? Fuck it, let's go the other way. I'd like to be more creative than like what has sort of been set up for us.
Sure, however you phrase it to help you yourself sleep at night. But so for me, it's it works really well because it's like, okay, I don't really have, I don't necessarily have points 1, 2, and 3, or it's like, okay, these are sort of like the main story beats. Like I'll have a general sense of the main story beats, or at least the beginning and what I'm going to shoot for as sort of the end of the session. Sometimes it's like, it's supposed to be a one shot, and then I've never run a one shot that was just a one shot.
I have that trouble too. I don't know what how do you run a one shot? How do you do that?
I don't know.
We had one on the channel on Sunday, and it was crazy because it was like a 2-hour one shot, and I could not believe it when it was over. I was genuinely shocked.
Secretly, Katie, you participated in a one shot that was in one session when the 3 Golden Girls went and delivered that package to
That's fair.
the gas farmer. That was like a self-contained little
Fair.
thing, and it was done in 2 hours. It was amazing. I felt so powerful after we got done with that, because I was like, a whole thing got done in 2 hours. I was like, it was like Nirvana, like as a dungeon master. But
One thing. Oh,
doesn't make any sense. It's super hard to actually get a one shot.
I was going to say, notably, I wasn't involved in either of those, so I might be the problem.
No, definitely not the problem.
That's amazing.
one thing that I do want to say, which I think is super important, as much as I love kind of like doing things that are unexpected. Like I like to surprise the DM, not in a way that like, completely throws things off the rails. But I think something that's really important for players and for DMs is to not think of it as like players versus the DM or DM versus players, but players in collaboration with the DM. Which I know, like, the first time that I ever DM'd, I was very much like, what can I do to, like, trick them and, like, make it hard for them? And after that session, I was sort of like, that doesn't feel good. That's not creating the story that I want to be creating. I'm just constantly looking for ways to, like, outsmart them and trick them. Yeah. And when you change that framing on both sides to sort of like, okay, we're storytelling together. And yes, there will be things that the DM will do that will create obstacles for us, but that doesn't mean that it's an us versus them mentality. It is still collaborative, even when there is conflict.
I like to think of it more as like, not quite a chess game, but kind of like putting out a puzzle for them to have fun with.
Yes.
Like, here's the problem. How do you want to solve it? And then, you know, throw in a couple tools to help them solve it. Like, I always try to throw in like tools or NPCs or something to try and help the players, which becomes a bit troublesome if they just so happen to antagonize that NPC it's supposed to help them instead. Then it becomes they have to figure it out themselves on their own or by themselves. Which actually, you know, I think is a really good segue into improving. But something I do want to hear a bit from you folks on is like, NPCs and characterization, because I've noticed at some tables that, you know, some NPCs can seem to be a bit one-dimensional as opposed to, you know, other tables. Like, one aspect I've been complimented on a lot by players is that my NPCs appear very real, like actual people. Like, they respond like you would expect a person to respond.
Yeah.
Like, if you hint at something, allude at something that could potentially offend them, they will actually get offended and then, you know, say, well, stuff you, and go on about their day.
I mean, and like, listen, if you do your NPCs in a different way, that is totally fine, to each their own. But
Yeah.
for me, it's not a video game for a reason, right? Like, video game NPCs, they have their 4 lines of dialogue. They say the same things over and over. Occasionally, you know,
Yes.
they'll get their little, like, whatever, but what you do does not really impact what it is that they say. And I mean, like, part of it is definitely my theater background and improv and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, I like every character to be a character. You know, they're not there just there as like a plot sort of device. They have families and they have personalities and they have, you know, distinct voices or whatever it is. Or even if they don't, still making them fun or funny or interesting, even if they're not going to, you know, have like, here are my 6 kids and my wife, and, you know, here's where I work every, like, you don't necessarily need to give that level of description. I mean, it'd be good to kind of have it in your head just as the person who is portraying them. But giving them something like either entertainment value or drama value, or just like something else needs to be present.
Yeah.
At least for me when I'm DMing. I don't like NPCs that just are kind of like, hello, would you please go fight this dragon? I need you to fight this dragon.
My blue cranberries. They're blue.
Exactly.
And I really think that it helps with the immersion into the game as well, and the setting.
Yes.
Which, you know, also, I don't know, maybe it's different for other folks, but for me, it helps with improv as well.
Very much.
Where
I think,
it's like, if you get that feeling like you're talking to an actual person, then you can really think from a certain character archetype, like, how would this archetype respond to that? And then likewise bounce off of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Ben, I don't know if you're going to say this, but one thing that you do, and you must be aware that you do this, but every time that, like, I don't know, we're like hurting a PC or we're killing a PC or an NPC rather, you always make them sympathetic. Like, you're always like, and you see clutched in his hand the pictures of him and his 3 children, and I'm just like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
I mean, you know, like, if you're gonna kill somebody, like, there are going to be emotional consequences. You killed a person who has a, you know, sure, they might be a bandit on the road, but like, you don't know, they could have sick kids. They like, there are any number of reasons beyond just like, I'm an evil gangster and I'm gonna rob you on the road and I've got a knife. Like, people have reasons for doing that. And if we're playing in, you know, like a high fantasy setting, which is traditionally based in like a bit of a you know, like typically a more like feudal system, we all, I mean, you know, granted, you could say there's a lot of, you know, issues with like current things and how that ends up sort of like these class disparities, but you've got people who are at the very bottom who are just getting walked all over by every aspect of society in the way that it's structured. So just because they're robbing you on the highway doesn't mean that they're inherently bad people. They just might be desperate and have no other options. So I like to, you know,
I mean,
like, okay, you can kill that person, but like, I also happen to know, like, when I'm playing with more sympathetic characters, that I can do that and pull on their heartstrings. I know, like, which buttons to press. And so, like, some of it's a little bit personal. I'm like, okay, you killed him. Sure. Here's the button for you. And now you're going to feel really bad about it.
And I mean, I think 2 things. One is that speaks to the thing that I always say, which is that I hate evil for evil's sake. I think it's bad writing. I've said this on multiple streams before. I think that every character needs to be dynamic and have a reason for doing the things that they do, even if they are a terrible character. Like, there needs to be a path that they took to get there. The second thing I was going to say is that Ben, with that type of treatment of villains and that sort of thing. It has definitely led to some interesting situations where we have like oh gosh, in that no prep one shot we did, where we captured that, was it a spider or whatever, one of the bad guys, we captured them. And because they were sort of like doing as they were told, and they had a little bit more of like a complex situation, we ended up converting them to socialism and being like, you need to come help us overthrow the queen. You are being mistreated. And we rolled super well. And then we got this ally that we would have just, had it been a different DM who was not particularly interested in fleshing out the characters and giving them a reason for being there, we wouldn't have gotten that ally and wouldn't have been able to like bring this person along with us on the rest of the journey, which I think is really fun and can create interesting situations that we and you as the DM didn't plan for.
Yeah. Another perfect example with Chaos Ladies, whenever the three of you were presented with taking down this like lady in white banshee, instead you chose the path of the heart and talked it out with this banshee, finding out the actual backstory of why they haunt the mansion, and instead empowering them to find, some solace in the afterlife and whatever. And, also thereby bypassing a tough fight where physical attacks would not have done nearly as much as, other stuff. And I noticed that this group is more stabby than anything else, so that would have made it very challenging. So It created a fantastic alternate, situation that, ended up driving the entire plot for the rest of this little mini campaign.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, I don't know about you guys when you DM. And Monk kind of hit on this with the comment there in chat about it being like like you have this like character who's maybe an NPC to start out with, but I try to make all of the NPCs that I play to some extent a character that I would enjoy playing as a PC, because it's like, okay, if I can get in the headspace and I can enjoy the character and I can think of a bit of a background, and I like inhabiting this character for 30 seconds or 30 minutes or 30 sessions, because the characters are like, you're with us now, we like you. That you can have, when you can have that much more fun with it because it's a character that you already like taking the time or improvising a story and committing it to memory, or whatever it is that you need to do, it becomes that much more of an enjoyable experience, which then also lends itself to that character being more fun to interact with in whatever context that may be.
Can I just say, one thing that still sticks out in my mind was that game that Ben really characterized and victimized a cube, a slime, literally a slime.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh, it was great.
I remember that.
I love my little goo baby.
My little goo baby.
He's just chilling here, minding his own business, and here you come.
Frank, he's just hanging out. He's a nice dude. He doesn't talk a whole lot, but he's a nice guy.
that one really stuck out in my mind, I have to say. And I do want to apologize if I'm not able to respond to chat more. I don't want to interrupt all of this lovely conversation, so I greatly apologize for that. But yeah, I really have no room to talk in terms of what Ben does with NPCs, because I know I've done it. In matter of fact, when I ran the Painted Skin adventure for my table, I actually had a very sympathetic arc with a guard, whereby he worked as a guard, but he was really being paid like nothing. He wasn't getting hardly any pay for it, and he had to support his mum, who was sick. She was elderly and she was sick. And so he ended up tangled up with some robbers to try and make up for the money that he didn't make as a guard. And they didn't know that when they encountered him as a robber, and then they just killed him. And so the last words was if they could give this money to his mum.
Oh,
it's fun.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
That's so good.
to learn the whole story behind the mom, and the mom obviously is asking about her son and how is he doing, and he hasn't been home from work yet, etc., etc. So, and the entire party was like, "Are we the bad guys?"
That's my favorite moment in a campaign is when you're just like, am I the problem? Oh no, I might be the problem. Oh no.
It's my favorite thing to do.
I've had that moment
yeah.
one too many times, I will say.
And then we had another moment like that. I think it was the Baron campaign with Hannah Carlin and Nikhail and Opie and Turiel. And that was really interesting because, like, obviously you can have a really bad politician who has actually employed good people.
Mm-hmm.
And their livelihood hinges upon how well they do their job.
Yep.
And so that was very much a dynamic that we went for, in that there was a lady who was a guard, and she was very, very fierce. She was a very fierce guard, and she performed her job very, very well. And the players took an instant dislike to her because she was a bit antagonistic towards them, because she's trying to do a job, and you have these people that just broke into the manor and set the library on fire. So, she could potentially get fired for this. So she's not happy about it. So they kill her. And then they find her daughter hiding under a table at the end of the hall. She was a single mom.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
That's when everyone's like, so Revivify. Do we have Revivify in the party? Can we just run back to real quick?
Do you have time rewind? Undo? Yeah,
No.
I think that also sort of something that we have talked about in like our world building streams is that we want to like focus a lot on sort of political systems and like the way that different sorts of like economies and ways that places are run impact the people in them. And I think that especially if you're looking at, like a monarchy or a dictatorship or something, like there are people who end up, working for the big bad who aren't necessarily bad people.
Definitely.
And I feel like you do yourself a disservice as a DM to just be like, well, the bad guy's over here and anyone guarding him, also a bad guy. Because that's just not how things work in the real world. And it's like, of course there aren't dragons in the real world either, but I feel like to me, TTRPGs and D&D are about taking things that happen in real life and sort of examining them through a lens of fantasy.
Definitely.
And it doesn't have to be that. For some people, it's not. For some people, it's just pure escapism, want to fight dragons, whatnot.
Yeah.
But for me, like I like the emotional component, and I like the using things that I've experienced in my life, or I want to explore more, and having sort of a creative outlet to do that. And yeah, all that is to say that if you're just creating characters that fall into the category of good or evil, you lose out on a lot of that discourse and a lot of the challenge and the conversation around like how to handle situations like that.
It's interesting because I can honestly say that I never really think about like what sort of political or economic system will go in first. I usually, for me, I always come from like the human experience first. Like what is the human experience I want to touch on? And then like sometimes just by virtue, it ends up in like a very specific like political or economic setting. Because that is a setting that is required in order to tell this specific human experience.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me too. I think I kind of start. It depends, right? Like doing this collaboratively. We definitely started looking at the world. But then once we had like a general idea of the world, we did say, all right, what is the story that we want to tell, and then how do we sort of set up the world to facilitate that story. And then a lot of the story that we do want to tell is about power and corruption and that sort of thing. So that does kind of lend itself naturally into, all right, like what does the socioeconomic structure look like? What do the political systems look like? Where is there wealth disparity, discrepancy, all that sort of thing. So, I think it's sort of a similar way of handling slightly different approaches.
That actually reminds me of when you asked me the question about whether, like, how much history goes into my writing. And I think more goes into my writing than even I realized, because I noticed that, like, another thing that I do is I'm a big advocate of taking, like, classic stories and then basically reviving them. Because, like, these classic stories are often taken and told to sort of is like a part of history. And if it's one thing that we've learned as humanity in a society, is that we have this interesting habit of having history repeat itself. Like, history goes through cycles. And
Yeah.
it actually, the first few lines out of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms reflects this very well when it talks about empires rising and then falling. And that's exactly what it speaks of, because in especially Chinese history, there's this, they have this understanding of empires. You have, like, this dynasty that rises and then it falls and then it's displaced by another one. And so in history, they do their history telling according to dynasty, because of this sort of cycle, in understanding that society has the tendency to repeat itself. And so that's always really interesting to me. And I think that that's often why I have an intense interest to sort of, like, take classical stories from history, from various old stories and books. The Shahnameh is one that I can think of. Layla and Majnun is another one. And one that more people were probably familiar with is the Odyssey. And a lot of these have stories that are generally commentaries of that time. And even Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio was also a collection of stories, and some of them were commentaries of the time, like The Painted Skin, for example, was very much a commentary on the politics at the time, where one of the antagonists, technical antagonist, shall I say, the actual antagonist was the monster in it, but Wang, the story was about him cheating on his wife, and then he finds out that the person he cheated on his wife with was actually a monster. And then the conclusion of the story was that the wife ended up paying for his misdeed. And so this was a scathing commentary of the men in the political system.
Interesting.
And so this was, these are, like, very important messages, very important lessons. And for me, it's kind of like we do ourselves a disservice by forgetting history.
Yeah.
Because it does have the tendency to repeat itself. So I have, like, this very intense interest to sort of revive these tales and try to bring it to the forefront and make it relevant to now. And I don't even think we got into an improv conversation, did we?
No, we didn't.
I love the direction we're headed in right now.
No, this is wonderful. And I mean, I definitely do think, like, Balra, if you're up to it, we should definitely do a part 2, because we haven't talked about half the things I think we could talk about. And would love to have you back again to just sort of dig into this more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah.
How are people feeling? I know we're about an hour and change in. I don't know how everyone is doing. We didn't say how long we were going to go for, so I just want to do a little time check.
So from my side, I was going to say, I feel like if we dive into improv, I feel like we're setting ourselves up for what is likely to be, like, kind of a long conversation. Just a hunch.
Yeah.
Which
I don't know where you get that idea from, but
we're all very concise, to the point.
Not verbose at all.
No, not at all. Never been accused of that. Do we maybe want to save talking about improv, and I'm sure we could come up with, like, 1 or 2 other things to talk about for us for, like, a part 2.
honestly, I think we could probably even just discuss improv for like an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Also that
for a long time,
yeah.
We could just start doing like some examples of stuff to do to like
That's
get
true.
some icebreakers down or whatever, and
Yeah.
before you know it, we're just having fun on the chat. So maybe that's what we do next time.
Balra, how does that sound from your side of things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We like sort of veered off and we just
No,
No,
it
it
was
was
Zero
great.
apologies necessary. That was fantastic. 10 out of 10. I
That
was just like, this is lovely. Didn't know
Yeah,
where it
that
was gonna
was-
go, and honestly felt very much like a D&D session where it's like, I don't know where this is going, but I'm enjoying the ride. So
Yeah, that's true. I feel like, and I don't know. I know at least with autism that's something that's very, very common to happen. You know, speaking of neurodivergence, is that we get
Yes.
started on a topic and then it just branches and branches and branches, and it's still related,
Yeah.
but we end up all the way over here because it's like related in some way. So it's
one of my best friends from college also has ADHD and autism. And when she and I have conversations with each other, it's like we're trying to go from here to here, and we end up doing like these like loop to loop to loop, and we eventually
Yes,
make it.
yes,
But it's like
yes.
it should have taken 5 minutes, and it takes us like 5 hours. So I am a-okay with that. I feel like for conversations like this, it's like it's good to have a couple of things that like guiding points, rails. But I kind of figured we would all sort of divert into whatever territory we felt like diverting into.
Mhm.
Yes.
Which I mean, you know, thank you for asking me on. I love
Yeah.
you guys. I know Katie and I especially I know we've been trying for some time to like make
I
time to get
know.
together and actually talk and or play, and schedules have just really, really been demanding. But
Yeah.
I love you and I appreciate you so
Yes,
much.
We love you too.
Especially because it was amazing to me, like following all of the like fallout that happened several months ago, and then you were the one
Yeah.
that reached out to me, and it meant so much to me. And then I had that panic attack right before Brian's stream.
Yeah.
So it's really been, we've had quite a journey from like then to now.
Yeah, very much. And it's like it's been so nice to get to know you, and like obviously we'll keep getting to know you. Maybe someday meet you in person. That would be crazy, but I would love that.
That would be fabulous.
That would be wild. But yeah, no, I like let's stay on after we raid, I don't know, Tale of D20s is on. Let's raid them.
Perfect.
But let's stay on. We
they're,
can
they're interviewing Lorbarian.
Oh,
That'll be
cool.
fun.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
sweet.
we'll definitely. Oh, and Zenderic is on. Shit. How do you choose? How do you choose between our two friends?
Roll the dice. Roll the dice.
Oh,
True.
I'll do it.
I've got a D100.
Okay.
We'll do it the TTRPG way.
Yes. 0 to 50 is Tale of D20s. 51 to 100 is that right, or is it 49? I'm bad at
51 to
math.
100. It's all right. It's all right.
Wait, and
Me
so what
too.
it
I'm
was?
next.
Did I? Oh yeah, I did. Okay.
That is a 99.
Okay, so that's a Tale of D20,
I don't
or
remember.
is that? I don't...
Help, chat. What did we say?
What did I say?
I know Zendark is doing a get to like 100 follower thing.
Okay,
Oh,
let's
really?
do
And,
Zendaric.
yeah.
Let's pop over and. You didn't say that. That sounds exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, we just
Yeah.
said ranges. That's on brand.
That-
Sick.
Yeah, cool. I think I said okay, so 0 to 50 is, and then I just completely lost it. Okay, so we'll read Zendaric. What it's gonna say is Balra. Let's stay on after. Let's find a time, put it in the books now to do a part 2, because I definitely want to like do more of this. It's been super fun to chat to you. I feel like,
Mhm.
I mean, I feel this way with like neurodivergent folks in general. It's just like our brains work the same way. So it's really fun to have conversations, and it's like, okay, you
Yeah.
get what I'm saying though, like you
Yes,
understand.
It's super fun and refreshing.
Yeah, it really is.
It's lovely.
Before you go, once again, if people want to find you, hang out with you, follow you, what would those links be, and where can they go?
I mean, literally, Balra VT across everything: Instagram, TikTok, Twitch, especially.
Yeah, everyone go follow Balra on Twitch right now. Do it. I'm mad at you if you don't.
Go.
Here's the link. Do the thing.
I mean, open it as a new tab. Hey, here.
Also, thank you to my community who popped in today.
Yeah.
I love you folks. Thank you so much. They're so wonderful.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much for joining.
Thank you,
Appreciate you contributing to this conversation and just kind of sticking with us and seeing where things go. And we'll obviously, when we figure out a date, we will share that out on Twitter and whatnot and make sure it's in the Twitch schedule because we definitely want to do more of this. All
It'd
right.
be fun.
Yeah.
Let us raid Zendaric. And everyone go follow so I was about to say his real name, and I realized I don't know if he's public with that. So Zendaric, everyone go follow Zendaric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks everyone so much. We will be back tomorrow with some 5e at 8 p.m. Eastern. And
Who's doing that?
you are. You're DMing.
Oh! I'm just kidding. I know exactly what's going to happen next, and it's so exciting.
Words I've never said as a DM.
But yeah, all right. So everyone, let's go over. Let's say hey. Let's give a follow, and we will be back soon with Balra again. And thank you again, Balra. This was
It was a lot of fun.
fantastic.
Yeah, no
All right.
worries.
Super
All right.
jazzed for the next time.
Let's go over and say hello.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.